3, 2, 1, go.
Hello again.
Welcome
to
Sparking Creativity, the Ethno Arts Podcast. We are your hosts once again. What's your name?
I'm Justin.
And I'm Trevor. It is good to be back.
Episode 3, we are talking about what? What's our focus today, Trevor?
We're going to talk a bit about visual arts today.
Visual arts, great.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, so does that mean you're an expert painter?
It does not. I can paint a mean wall. How about you?
I can draw stick figures really well. And that's about the extent of my abilities.
Oh man, though, we are art appreciators, though. At least I am. I love the arts. I love museums. I love checking out what's going on visually, and I wish I could do it better, and it's something that's on my bucket list to learn how to do better. But we are definitely not experts, but we're excited to talk a bit about visual arts in the ethno arts community today.
It's something that when we talk about art or visual arts, people put it in that category of kind of high art or fine arts, the kind that you would see in a museum, famous paintings, which is part of that. And I would think in most communities around the world and cultures, visual arts plays a bit of a different role. While there probably are those that are reserved for a museum and something maybe considered high art, we're talking about something a little bit different and more that takes place in the everyday.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I'm questioning how I talked about it already, but that's how I was brought up. Art is a thing that's on a wall. It's something that you go and visit and you admire and you maybe have to be real smart to understand. But we are talking about cultural art forms, visual arts that are all around. And there's probably a lot of stuff that you've never really noticed or put in that category, but has a lot of meaning. So we're going to talk about concepts about that, how it might link to identity. Similar to the past few episodes, we've talked a lot about cultural identity and the art forms that we see all around us and how they help us stay connected to our community. We saw that with the J community and the art forms that they worked with, and that kind of unlocked worship for them. We talked about that with the Canela last episode, and how it was just so different than maybe what you were familiar with or what I was familiar with, but is beautiful to the people who have grown up listening to it and singing it. And now we're going to talk about that in another realm.
Mm-hmm. So just a disclaimer up front is that we do have very limited knowledge on the topic. We're speaking mainly from our experiences of this particular art form and what we've been told, plus a little bit of what we've been able to pull from some internet research. But we want to invite those of you who are listening who do know more to share with us. You can share your examples. You can share your stories to our email address, which is ethnoartspod@gmail.com, or at ethnoartspod on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, and it's a little bit weird to be talking about visual art in a medium where we cannot show you that stuff. So please check it out. We'll have examples. We'll hopefully be able to direct you some great information and actual visual arts that you can check out and experience through your eyes.
That's right. We'll try to put some links in the show notes and put out posts of some of these very specific images that we'll be looking at on those channels as well. The other thing to know is that today's is a little bit less of a full story like in previous episodes, but this is more of a beginning to explore this particular art form from these communities. And we've pulled together from websites and articles, and we're working also to connect with contributors of a book that we'll talk about that came out a few years ago that are featuring these communities in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And we will be revisiting this in the future and hopefully finding some more, building a bigger story or a bigger picture of this. But before we dive in, Trevor, can you explain to us our word of the day or our phrase or our...
Yes, I'll give it a shot. So when talking about visual arts, one of the things that we come across is what we would call visual literacy. And it's similar to literacy when we're talking about learning to read and write in your own language. Visualliteracytoday.org. There's a definition there that says ability to read, write, and create images. That would be what visual literacy is described as. If you check it out on Wikipedia, another edition of this would say visual literacy is the ability to interpret, negotiate, and make meaning from information presented in the form of an image. And this is pretty good for what we use visual literacy to mean. I also found a quote from a book by Fugelsang. I don't know how to pronounce that, Fugelsang. People have to learn to read pictures just as they learn to read the pages in a book. And that's not really something we necessarily think about every day, but the way that we interpret just images can really come from our culture and come from where we grew up. There might be some images that we talk about today. This is some foreshadowing that you wouldn't understand at first glance. Probably because of the way you grew up and with your own visual literacy. Is that okay? Is that a good definition?
Yeah. Main point is, again, just like what we saw with the Canela example last time, when we hear it for the first time, it evoked a different emotion in us, different feeling, mm-hmm. which then formed assumptions on what it would be used for, and we've seen a wide variety of that from different audiences interpreting the sound in different ways and assigning meaning to it. So the same thing here: images, colors, patterns, symbols are going to have different meaning to different people, and what we're wanting to know is what does it mean to the community? And how are they using it?
Yeah, that's really good. So give us what you got. Tell us what you know about this art form and where it's from and what it means to the people there.
So today we're highlighting Aboriginal people from Australia, which there are more than one. I'm pulling from a website called Artlandish, Aboriginal Art Gallery website. I was first introduced to this style through classes or trainings from way back when, and what stood out to me was just what we're talking about, how it was different. I couldn't understand what the image was about until I was told what it means to the community. So we're going to back up a little bit, and before we get into some of the specifics, we just want to know first how it's used, where it came from. The Aboriginal people are located in different regions of Australia. The website here says that there's no written language, so that they portrayed important cultural stories throughout their generations with symbols or icons in their visual arts. They would tell stories maybe to teach survival and use of the land. They would have educational uses for these for the visual arts, as well as teaching morals through the stories. So the visual arts were one of the ways in which they told stories. They kind of went hand in hand and there were important uses for that. Then you fast forward to 1971 when a school teacher named Jeffrey Barden was working with Aboriginal children in Papunya. He noticed that when the men were telling the stories, they would draw these symbols in the sand. So he encouraged them to then paint their stories up onto canvases and the board, which began the famous Aboriginal art movement. This was a big shift for them because putting stories onto these Western facades, they said it was a foreign concept to them. Before, they would draw it on rock, and they would even paint on their bodies for different ceremonies and different things that they would be doing. So this was a new thing for them, but it began to grow and blossom from there. One interesting thing that it said was that these Aboriginal artists would need permission to paint particular stories. So they would inherit the right of these stories, which are passed down through generations within different groups. So an artist cannot paint a story that does not belong to them through their family lines, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
So there are a lot of different styles in the different regions in Australia, and we can't get into them all, but the website that we can link you to, you can learn more about and see a lot more examples. One of the examples we'll look at is called a dot painting style, and this is kind of like a mosaic, if you imagine, like smaller pieces that are put together to form a bigger picture. Many believe that this came from that they decided to use this particular style. It was developed to hide information from white men when the Aboriginal people became afraid that they would be able to see and understand that their sacred and private knowledge told in their story.
Coded in a way.
Yeah. So the dots were used to obscure some of the secret symbols and iconography underneath. So you can see some examples of these. There's a range of colors, and these smaller dots are formed into patterns and shapes and images, and it's just one of the many variety of styles. It's very beautiful. I really enjoy looking at it, but it takes...
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. It's gorgeous. I mean, it looks like it would take forever, and I don't understand the symbolism, but it's beautiful to my eyes.
So on the website here from this art gallery, they have some articles featuring these different styles that you can go and look at, and have a different idea. I was introduced to some of the styles through a couple of paintings, and I think one of them might have been a dot style originally, but they were of biblical stories, using some of these unique styles and especially symbols and icons. And what stood out to me particularly was when I couldn't guess what was going on when they told me the insider meaning, was how they used to represent people in the stories. And so we'll put up a link also from the website. It's sort of like a legend of different symbols and what they're used for. And the one that they use to represent people is just a horseshoe shape or a U shape. And so if you imagine like you're sitting down in the sand looking up from the top, you leave this kind of U shape print in the sand from where you were sitting. And that's the symbol they use to represent people. And there's a whole host of other symbols and icons where they combine it with this to differentiate between a man, a woman, or a spirit being, or a sick person, or a dead person. And I encourage you to check out that link. You can just see how different it is. And so I remember thinking that once I know that these are all people, it completely changes how I interpret it. One example we can look at now is a painting of the Last Supper. I found this on a website called Global Christian Worship, was a blog started by a colleague of ours. And from here, he linked to some other sites and articles that I'll mention. But the one that, if we just can look at that right now, is obviously there's a big cross there, so I assume there's some Christian meaning behind it. There's some things that look like trees, a sky, but then there's these horseshoe shape, a few of them together, looks like maybe around a fire. This is definitely that dot pattern. But now that I know that this horseshoe shape is people, I can recognize, okay, so there's people sitting around something. I couldn't necessarily think that, or be able to tell that this is the Last Supper from here. But you can go onto this blog that we'll share, and you can get the authors, their kind of basic analysis of that. But that's an example of some of those horseshoe-shaped people. And I think the one that I saw originally was like the birth of Jesus. And so there were several. There were some with staffs, and there were some looked like maybe the gifts that were out, and all of them were facing towards this very small horseshoe shape, which was baby Jesus. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I don't know if there's one that I can remember from training that was kind of a bunch of different scenes, straight out of the Gospels. From the Bible, and so they were different. I remember teachers asking, what do you think this one is? What do you think that one is? Can you see what these stories are? And I think one of the interesting things here is the perspective is so different. It's not necessarily as if you're looking at the pictures from the vantage point that you would normally see them. It's almost, not all of them, but several of these that I've seen are essentially from above, from the sky. It's kind of, the one that you're mentioning with the cross is a little bit mixed. So when you're talking a horseshoe shape, the horseshoe being kind of the shape in the sand that your legs would make, essentially. We always affectionately call them the butt prints, but I don't know if that's really what it was. But it was the perspective from up above, an aerial view. And so in a lot of these biblical stories, you could see horseshoe, 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 and then, a different symbolism for like the Holy Spirit, which was dotted lines around a double horseshoe, or maybe it was a triple horseshoe being the Trinity. So there's a lot of interesting symbolism, but you had to figure out, where do I shift my brain to be visually? It's not like looking at a picture of the Last Supper, where you see it as if you're in the room with them. You're more likely seeing it from kind of a perspective up above, that you can see a scene, and not the perspective of bigger people are in the background or in the foreground, and smaller people are in the background. That might be confusing to people who have the visual literacy of these Aboriginal art forms. To see a big person and a small person wouldn't necessarily mean one's further away and one's closer. It would more mean, that person's a giant, or that person is tiny. It would mean something different if your literacy included a different perspective. So I think that's important to note.
Yeah, that has a lot of implications to how, like, the messages and stories that we want to share.
Absolutely.
And for them, what I'm really curious about is how all of these got started with telling biblical stories through this art form. So next I want to move to an article that was from ABC Radio National in 2017. It was written by Rachel Cohn, and it's featuring a book that was published by the Bible Society of Australia. This book is called Our Mob, God's Story. Indigenous Artists Share Christian Faith Through Painting. And I'm in the process of trying to connect with some of the artists and the editor of the book to learn more about this. So hopefully we can get into this more. But the article, I'm just going to read some excerpts of it is just sort of the beginning of some of the artists being exposed to the gospel message, and then moving into wanting to use this art form to share the gospel. So it starts out by saying that among the 73% of indigenous Australians who claim Christianity as their faith, Max Conlon is an artist and a Christian minister in Queensland. He says, from his story in the beginning, I guess inside I was searching for love. I was bleeding on the inside like nothing else. I wanted that. I wanted to hear it from my dad, but I never heard it. Somebody invited me to church one day, so I went along. That day was meant for me. It was a divine appointment. The man was preaching that somebody loved me. My heart was popping, that Jesus died on the cross. I never heard that before. I gave my heart to Jesus that day, and a light switched on in my life. Max is one of 66 artists representing 41 language groups who have contributed their stories and artwork to celebrate the 200th anniversary of Bible Society Australia, the oldest continuous organization in the country. The result is this book, Our Mob, God's Story. The book represents an important shift in the thinking of Bible Society, which since its early days had primarily been devoted to distributing copies of the Bible and spreading the word. But as Bible Society Australia Chief Executive Greg Clark admits, the languages of the heart are different for different people. For Indigenous Australians, he says, pictorial forms of communication are embedded in their traditional art. And Christianity has seen pictures historically as less valuable than the word there. Some of the metaphors for Jesus and God are word-based, but we can't limit ourselves to those things. There are just so many resources God's given to us to understand him and the world, and a lot of things are visual resources or audio resources. And we're crazy if we limit ourselves to one form of communication. They all play different roles. With the Bible Society celebrating a milestone, Mr. Clark says that there's a need to be honest about the mistakes of the past. The missionaries who introduced Indigenous Australians to the Bible were also involved in suppressing Indigenous languages and separating children from their parents. It's something we're deeply ashamed of as a nation, and certainly as a Christian church, that we have let people down in many places and many times, Mr. Clark says. We need to face that and be honest about that. And having done that, be able to explore some of the good things that has happened as well and learn from them. One of the lessons that is learned is the importance of using, quote, languages of the heart to communicate the gospel. Bible Society Australia is working to produce translations of the Bible in the very languages that were once suppressed. But it's a long and painstaking process. The only full translations are the Creole Bible of 2008 and the Torres Strait Creole New Testament of 2014. And this was as 2017, so maybe there's some more has happened since then. As communities wait for translations in other languages, visual art has an important role, says Safina Stewart, a young Bunjil artist from the Torres Strait. She says, I'm convinced Aboriginal art is an extremely effective way of sharing the gospel, both with non-Indigenous and Indigenous people, she says. I've seen how powerful it is to tell stories to people who have no idea about Jesus and Indigenous culture. And that's where it ends. So this kind of left me really wanting more. Like, what have they done with it? What's going on now? And so I think this book points to a lot of that. There's a lot of different artists represented, like we learned, 41 language groups. I can't imagine the diversity that's there. But so we know for sure that there's this kind of awakening that has happened, and there's this art form is being put into the limelight and out front for people. I saw a dedication video where it's saying how it's spread and sold out and all around the world. And so I'm really hoping that we can track down to find out what are they doing with it, what has been how the Aboriginal communities received
Yeah.
Not just the book itself that's celebrating their culture, but also the ones that are telling biblical stories, and how is that being used in churches or communities, and what is that, what is the impact that it's been having? I'm really curious. So I wish we had more to share on that, but this is sort of leading us up to where we hope to learn more. But we see it's such a meaningful art form. It's in their culture, used to tell important stories and teach important lessons, which certainly fits with the gospel. And we see Christian artists who are wanting to use their gifts in that way.
Yeah.
And so I can't wait to hear more. And the fact that it's completely theirs, it's in their styles, and they don't need all the explanations that you and I had to have to understand and appreciate the art forms.
Yeah, and it's interesting.
And stories.
It highlights something that happens all over the world too, and that is, I would say more often than other art forms, visual arts ends up being a way for communities to connect and adapt to the world outside of them, and potentially sell their wares, sell their where we worked there. They call it their artesanatos. So they could sell the things that they made, and they would find out, okay, what do people in the broader community want? And so they would adapt and make things like something that they had a purpose for would look really good on a wall to an outsider. And whether or not you get the explanation or you get the history or you get the depth, you generally don't. So it's really good to have a book like this, something that you can point to, that you can explain the depth of that, the beauty of it, the historical and cultural value in that. But also it can be one of those ways that actually helps people become more empowered and, not have to give up their culture in order to feed their families. So I would hope that stuff like this happens all over the place. I know it does. That people appreciate other people's cultural artwork to the point where it can help them find some sort of community development, economic freedom, whatever it might be that people in a community need. I think visual arts is a great way that people have found to show their beauty.
Absolutely.
And it can be profitable for
so
them
many
as well.
So many applications. And I think in the majority of like the different domains of work, like in education or worship, scripture engagement, there's a visual component to all of those things that sometimes could get overlooked. And if without knowing some of this insider knowledge, it can put up barriers like we talked about, or it can communicate the wrong thing, that it's not for them, or cause confusion. So how important it is that communities have ownership of sharing the gospel in ways that are familiar and meaningful to them.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I think one of the things that we're always watching out for as we repackage information, whether that's Bible translation or these other things, literacy, whatever it may be, we have to be aware of the things that might completely distract from the message, because of this barrier between our visual literacy and theirs, because it could be something very, very small that gets in the way of the actual message you want to communicate. I actually just used this with one of my kids today, and it might apply to this. I'm not sure. But I heard a quote just yesterday that was a mom telling her child, okay, your mess is getting in the way of your message right now when you're trying to communicate something, and maybe you're speaking at a louder volume, or you're just really upset about something, if you're trying to communicate a message, sometimes the mess around the message or the packaging that it's in, if you're really upset, or, perhaps in terms of visual arts, if there's something that doesn't make sense visually to the audience that you're trying to reach, it's going to obstruct the message that you're trying to get to. And you have to figure out what that might be and ask a lot of questions. There are so many questions you need to ask in terms of people understanding what is trying to be communicated, because it could be something very simple that if you remove that, then people will go, oh, now I understand what you're trying to tell me. And oftentimes I would say it's probably a visual thing that can get in the way because it's not lining up across cultures.
Yeah.
So that's a really
one
really
of the
good
example
stuff.
that comes to mind that I've heard, and I don't remember where it's from, but it's in a community where the color white is used in mourning, and they're watching some Jesus video, and he was wearing like a white robe, and they were like, "Is Jesus going to the funeral?" And it's completely opposite of whatever was happening, but it was confusing. It was distracting for whatever was going on, and it's
Because in the original context, or whoever made that film, white meant purity, or it meant something different. Yeah, it's something as simple as what color someone might be wearing. So that's just fascinating.
absolutely.
I think we've got several episodes in the future to talk
so-
about all of this.
so much.
This is
So
a good
much,
intro.
and maybe you, our listeners, have some examples of this that you've seen where you live in communities that you're a part of, or things that you've heard. So
Yeah.
please send that in and share it. Maybe we can post some of that and share in our social media platforms as well. It'd be great to be able to kind of highlight some different things that are happening around the world, even outside of our particular episodes, and be able to celebrate different cultures together that way.
Okay. So, as Justin said, if you have any questions that this raised for you, or concerns with something we said, or you have something that resonated with you that you never thought of before, or if you have examples, we'd love to hear them. If there's something confusing, anything, please feel free to email us at ethnoartspod@gmail.com. You could message us on Facebook or Instagram. Those are at ethnoartspod. You can find us there. We're going to share in the show notes, and we're going to share visuals from each of these episodes, hopefully, but especially today's, because we're talking about visual art. You can click around on the links and check out the websites and books. I looked for that book, and the website I found said that it was out of stock or out of print, and I was disappointed. So hopefully that is something that we could get our hands on in the future. And please share this podcast if you'd like to. I'm sure we're supposed to say all those things like rate and subscribe and all that stuff so more people can hear it. But we just ask that you don't share these stories without permission, but you can, again, ask us, and we can work with you on that too. We'd love to have more people hear these stories and spread the word about ethno arts and what God's doing around the world. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much. See you next time.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. We would love to hear what you thought.
What resonated with you today? What questions did this raise? Anything you'd like to learn more about? Maybe you have stories you'd like to share.
Please feel free to contact us at ethnoartspod@gmail.com, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram at ethnoartspod.
We also invite you to subscribe, rate, and leave a review on whatever platform you're listening on. This will help others to find out about the show. Please feel free to share the podcast with others.
We look forward to sharing more with you next time on Sparking Creativity, the Ethno Arts Podcast.